It is a pleasure for me to welcome Mary Burns to our service this morning. So Mary, if you'll come on up and share your information, your wisdom, and your passion.
Thank you. Good morning. Is this on? Can you hear me? Very good. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you on this celebratory day for Earth Day. I really appreciate being here. And I am going to talk to you about an exhibit that I created all about women and water. And these are portraits that I wove on my loom, and this is one of the pieces here that we brought in to show you. We are, as Irv mentioned, really blessed to live in this area with beautiful, clear water, and it's not so across the globe. And that little boy is so cute. So I started this exhibit to honor water through telling the stories of women who work with it, advocate for it, and protect it. These are women from across the world. There are 29 woven portraits in the exhibit representing 39 women from over 20 countries, plus the Arctic and Antarctic. And these are regular people, you know, people like you and I doing astonishing things. And there are so many more women that we could have included in the exhibit. It was hard to stop. Here's a map showing the extent of the countries that the women are from. And I had some different goals in creating this exhibit. And the main one is to bring attention to water. As Irv was mentioning, so many people across the globe, and a lot of people right here in the United States do not have access to clean drinking water. So water issues, and I want to inspire people to take action to protect our waters. And another goal would be to communicate science and social issues through art, because we have found that art and the humanities open the heart. So weaving this exhibit was a spiritual experience for me, and it continues to be a spiritual experience. And something that I prayed about a lot, and began that thought process in 2016, and the first weaving took place in 2017 of this woman. She was grandmother Josephine Mandamin Ba from Ontario. She's Anishinaabe. She is the person who is credited, and it's true, with spreading the practice of water walking across North America and across the world. And a water walk, some of you are probably familiar because you had one here yesterday, is a sacred journey. And it's along or around a body of water to help raise awareness for that water, to help raise people's interest in keeping that water safe. So grandmother Josephine walked over 15,000 miles for water in her lifetime. She walked around each of the Great Lakes. She walked the length of the Mississippi twice. So she is the first person that I contacted, and I became aware of Grandmother Josephine and water walking because my previous exhibit was Ancestral Women, Wisconsin's 12 Tribes, where I worked with the tribes to see if they would be interested in participating. And I wove a portrait of an elder woman from each of Wisconsin's tribes. And in doing so, one of the many things that I learned was the reverence that Native people have for water, and that women in many indigenous communities are considered the keepers of the water. So Josephine was so gracious, she prayed and considered my proposal and came back to me with her approval, and really felt that the exhibit had the best intentions. So here I am presenting her. I wove an extra portrait and gave it to her. And she passed in, 2018 or 2019 from pancreatic cancer, pretty quick. And the last video that I saw of her, she was sitting in her home speaking to all of us, and she had the portrait, she was sitting below the portrait, so it made me feel really, really good. So many of the women in the exhibit, and I dare say probably all of the women in the exhibit, have deep spiritual connections to water. Not only does water provide everyday needs, but it's an essential part of their lives and history. It is part of their being. Water is a relative. So I want to give you kind of an overview of the exhibit, because each of these women has an incredible story, and in 15 or 20 minutes, I don't have enough time to tell the in-depth story, but I'll do the best I can. So we'll start with water walkers, other water walkers. Autumn Pelche is now 19. She began water work when she was 8 years old. She's Grandmother Josephine's great niece. She has traveled the globe speaking for water. She is the chief water commissioner for the Anishinaabe in Ontario. So that means she represents 40 First Nations in their water dealings. She's spoken before the United Nations. She's just remarkable. So she is someone young and vibrant, and she would be someone to keep your eyes on, because she is doing really great work. Tinker Schumann from Lac du Flambeau, some of you may know Tinker. She is an elder, a poet, an artist, a healer. She is a spiritual leader. She led the water walks in Lac du Flambeau, and she is a dear friend. Other water walkers include Tawera Tahuri from New Zealand, and Tawera was in the United States and met Josephine when Josephine was preparing to walk from the Pacific to Lake Superior. She was so inspired by Grandmother Josephine's work that she went home and started water walks there. Sharon Day from Minneapolis is an Anishinaabe elder, and she leads water walks, and she established an organization called Nibi Walk. She does walks annually. She's led over 20 walks. Last year, she led a walk around Lake Superior. There are many, many activists in the exhibit. Wilma Mankiller, you may have heard of. She was the first female chief of the Cherokee, but she was also an activist. And one of the things that she did is getting back to people not having fresh drinking water. The little town of Bell, Oklahoma had no running water. So none of the residents had water. They had to truck the water in. So she raised funds through grants to build a 16-mile pipeline to bring water to this community. But the funds only covered the materials, and she had to inspire the townspeople to dig and install that pipeline themselves. It was so successful that it inspired other communities to do similar actions. Ikal Angale from Kenya founded Friends of Lake Turkana. Lake Turkana is one of the largest lakes in Africa, and it is, there are hundreds of thousands of indigenous people that live in that lake basin area, and her organization is working to mitigate the effects of upstream dams on lake levels and pollution. Other activists include, maybe some of you have heard of Monica Lewis-Patrick. She is from Detroit. She is known as the Water Warrior of Detroit. She co-founded an organization called We the People of Detroit, and they work to provide fresh drinking water to families and other human rights activities that they work on. Nafisa Barrett from Gujarat, India. Nafisa works in a very arid area of India, and she was there and saw how the lack of water was causing deaths, was causing violence. And she worked to establish an organization with some other people called Yutan, which means upliftment in Hindi. And they work with especially women, but all people's rights to fresh water. And they have done some very innovative and creative ways to get fresh drinking water and have the women have a say. It's really remarkable. And she and I are working together on some other projects right now. Berta Caceres from Honduras. In her weaving, I included her mother because her mother was her biggest inspiration. Honduras has suffered greatly with violence against environmentalists. In like a 4-year period, over 100 environmentalists were killed. There was a long problem with DESA, which is an hydroelectric company trying to build dams on sacred Linka indigenous rivers, and she organized people to blockade that peacefully, and the people won, but they assassinated her in 2016. She was murdered, and the only good thing that came out of that is that all the people responsible for her murder have been imprisoned, including the CEO of that company. So she is a hero. Other activists include Alita Bon from Timor, again, someone who fought mining companies to safeguard their headwaters of all the rivers in their area. Again, very successful. Marina Rykovanova from Siberia. On her weaving, you can see there's a map in the background, and that map represents Lake Baikal. Lake Baikal is the largest freshwater lake in the world by volume. It is, in comparison with Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world by surface area. It has, I think it's 23% of the fresh water in the world. All of our Great Lakes combined have 22%. Anyway, she's a biologist. She worked to close down a highly polluting paper mill on the shores of the lake and rerouted a pipeline. Anyway, in 2016, her offices were raided, and we don't know what has happened to her since. So the bravery of many of these women is just astonishing. Journalists and writers. Sandra Postel is really well known as a global water policy specialist. She travels the world helping to find natural solutions to water issues. She won the 2020 Stockholm Water Prize, which is kind of like winning the, I don't know, so, the Nobel Prize. She's amazing. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and I brought Marjorie's portrait today. Marjorie Stoneman Douglas is really credited with saving the Everglades. She was a journalist in Florida and wrote many inspiring stories about the Everglades and how they were being totally drained and destroyed. And she motivated the public to put pressure on the government to save the Everglades. She won the Presidential Medal of Freedom when she was 103, and she died when she was 108. But she was apparently just a feisty, outspoken person and well-loved in her community. There are many scientists in the exhibit. Gretchen Garish, some of you may know Gretchen. She is the director of Trout Lake Limnology Station, the University of Wisconsin's Trout Lake Limnology Station, just down in Boulder Junction. It's the oldest running limnology station in the world. They do globally important work. And Gretchen's also an educator, and she studies bioluminescent astrocads in the Caribbean. I mean, really cool stuff. Sylvia Earle is another super inspiring person. She is a diver. She's led over 100 expeditions. She is now in her late 80s. She's still continuing to lead expeditions, and she travels globally speaking. She's a former chief scientist for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, National Geographic Explorer in Residence. Library of Congress has called her a living legend. Time magazine calls her first hero for the planet. She has said, "Take care of the oceans as if your life depended on it, because it does." She is the founder of Mission Blue, and the biggest goal that they have is to set aside sanctuaries in the oceans. And so far they have over 140, they call them hope spots. Asha DeVos from Sri Lanka is the first and only marine biologist in all of Sri Lanka, and she studies the only non-migratory population of blue whales. Victoria Bushman is the first Inuk doctor of conservation biology in the world, and she tries to bring indigenous knowledge to all decisions concerning the Arctic. Some of you probably know Carol Warden from Trout Lake. She's an educator and researcher there. And Emily Stanley is a University of Wisconsin professor in limnology. More women. Kathleen Carpenter wrote the first textbook on freshwater ecology in 1928. She was from Wales, but she taught in the United States quite a bit. I'm going to talk a little bit later about the African women in science. And Mary Alice McWhinney was a professor at DePaul University, and she was on the forefront of bringing women to the Arctic, to Antarctica, and was the first of many women who have worked there, and she kind of paved the way for future women. So, and more, Veda Fadianka and Carita from Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique are super brave women, and I don't have time to tell their whole story, but they are farmers who saved their community by the work that they did with water. Anofo Hayave from the Kingdom of Tonga is an ocean steward. She is also the first female sea captain, licensed sea captain in all of Polynesia. She is licensed to captain 3 different vessels, types of vessels. She's really wonderful as well. Oops. And then Rachel Carson. Now, a lot of you probably know Rachel Carson, of Rachel Carson. We find that the younger people, when I'm giving presentations, have no idea who she is. And especially today, this weekend on Earth Day weekend, she should be really celebrated. In the 1950s, she was one of the most popular writers in North America. She wrote books about the sea. But she was a biologist and she worked for, and an editor, and she worked for the US Fish and Wildlife Service. And she was seeing the problems with expanded use of DDT and other pesticides. And she wrote Silent Spring to bring the knowledge of what was happening with these pesticides to the general public. Because of her work, the EPA was established. The Clean Water Act was passed. She is really the inspiration for the ecology movement. Unfortunately, she died of cancer prior to all of these things coming to fruition. So in the spring of 2022, I had quite a few of the portraits done. I didn't finish the last portrait until about a year ago. So I was still working on the exhibit, but we had been invited to bring the exhibit to an international conference. And there were close to 3,000 attendees at the conference from 57 countries. And I knew ahead of time that a coalition of young women from Africa were coming. And here they are. So there's a center in Africa called the African Center for Aquatic Research and Education, and every year they sponsor a cohort of up to 12 young women scientists. And this, in 2022, they brought this group to this conference, and John and I got to spend time with them on several days and got to know them. And it was really wonderful to see these young women doing so much good work. So if you're not familiar, the African Great Lakes do exist. They comprise 25% of the world's fresh water, and they're essential to 62 million people. So these women are all working in various aspects on the African Great Lakes. So I kind of thought, well, one of them they would decide who they would want to have in the exhibit. Well, they all wanted to be in the exhibit, so I wove all of them into the exhibit, which was really fun. It was great to get to know them. So sacred water, holy wells and revered water sources are found across the globe from ancient times to the current day. Ireland alone has over 3,000 holy wells, and many of them are dedicated to Bridget, goddess and saint. And my background is Irish, so I wanted to include Bridget in my exhibit as a representative of all those holy sites around the world. And as I mentioned earlier, I think that all of the women in this exhibit have a sacred connection to water. And if we think about it, I think all of us do. I feel really blessed to have the skills and the loom and the ability to do this work, and I try to honor those gifts through my work. The future is to exhibit in more diverse venues. We're exploring some new funding sources, but mainly to inspire action. Get people to think about water and what we can do to protect it. Here's a calendar of where the exhibit has been and where it is going. I'm working with several other venues, but I don't have confirmed dates. There's a possibility that Nafisa Barrett and her organization, Uton, and I, or John and I, are potentially taking the exhibit to Bangkok in December for a global women in development forum for the Southern Hemisphere. We'll see. We've applied and we'll find out by the end of the month if we're going. And we have a book that tells the in-depth stories of each of these women, which has been really, really great. We've been getting great response to the book, like people saying, well, I read a chapter a night and just kind of savor it. It's emotional. This is me. My husband, John Bates, and I collaborate on a lot of these things. And it's true, I hand weave all of these. These weavings are all cotton, and for this exhibit, I probably threw my shuttle with the yarn on it 70,000 times, which is probably why I have thumb issues. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, and as Sylvia Earle says, no blue, no green.
Mary, thank you so much. I did some checking. The word water shows up almost close to 800 times in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. Obviously, water is crucial to our survival, but it's also very much a part of a sense of symbolism of life, of wholeness, of wellness, and of health. So the idea that we can use it and abuse it is a tragedy. We are called to be good stewards of the water. I think of that now every time I turn on the faucet, brush my teeth, and then I realize I'm letting it continue to run. I don't need to do that. So think about it. It is an incredible gift that we have. If it is so damaged that it can't be used, so will our life be damaged, so we cannot live. By all means, thank you for your inspiration. And if you get a chance to visit a time when this exhibit is shown, I'm sure you'll be impressed as you stand before it and see these incredible women who, with their courage, with their vision, with their energy, and their commitment to not only their interest in water, but everyone's interest in water. And as my Native American friends have said, whatever we do, make sure that it will have impact positively for not just this generation, but for every generation thereafter, at least no less than 7. So God bless you. Thank you, Mary, for your service and for your work.